Hello students, Miss John here. We're on from the dining room today. Today we're talking about Chapter 12, Lesson 1. So, from about 1816 to 1824, there was only one major political party. Remember, that was pretty good times. They called it the era of good feelings. Yeah, that's done for. In 1824, even though there was only one political party, there ended up being four candidates. Four candidates, all from the same party. In part, it had to do with sectionalism. Or the differences, as we learned, between regions. Basically, the South, North, and West started to have their own sort of interests and goals, and they weren't always the same. So we're going to learn all about this in ensuing political doo-doo storm on the next page. Okay. So the Democratic Republicans picked a guy to run for president, as they always do, well, for the 1824 election. So they all get together and they say, all right, we like this guy, he's going to run. They chose William Crawford. The problem is there were three other Republicans that basically wanted to run, and they were called favorite sons. They pretty much run a favorite son based on support in their own state. That's why they're called the favorite son. They're like, oh, well, let's see who they were. For the West, you had both Andrew Jackson of Tennessee as well as Henry Clay of Kentucky. So basically, Andrew Jackson was like, hey, I'm really popular, I should run for president. And then Tennessee was like, you totally should run for president. Same thing with Henry Clay in Kentucky. And then John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, and he was from Massachusetts. And he had the support of a lot of New England and New England merchants, specifically. So all four of them were going to run. Now the problem with four people running is you need 51% of the electors, basically the electoral points, to become president. And so with four people running, it wasn't likely anyone was going to get a majority, or over 51%. Jackson ended up winning the most electors, but he only had 31% or 37%, and you need 51%. So that's called a plurality. He won the most, but it wasn't what he needed, which was the majority. So that means that the election is decided by the House of Representatives. And now this is where things get questionable. Henry Clay, who ran, met with John Quincy Adams, who also ran, and they both agreed that they want Jackson to be president. So Henry Clay met with John Quincy and agreed to use his influence as Speaker of the House. See, Clay was currently the Speaker of the House, so like the biggest dog in the House of Representatives. And he's running, so oh boy, that sounds fun. And he said he would use his influence to not let Andrew Jackson win. As a result, John Quincy Adams ended up winning. And coincidentally, Henry Clay ends up becoming Secretary of State for John Quincy Adams. So it seemed like a little tit for tat. And the Andrew Jackson people were pretty furious. They said that there had been a corrupt bargain. There's some shady dealings that taken place. Now, Adams claimed that it done nothing wrong, and there's really no actual proof that anything occurred even to this day, but as a result, the Adams presidency then and still is now somewhat mired in shadow. Now, as president, John Quincy Adams had plans to improve roads and waterways. He wanted to spend money on arts and sciences. He wanted to create a national university. Problem is, in general, Democratic Republicans don't like spending money or growing the government, so they didn't really want to spend money on a national university or arts and sciences. Some of his roads and bridges and infrastructure type projects were approved, but overall, John Adams didn't get to do a whole lot. And that brings us, right to the next election, the election of 1828. The election of 1828 was kind of brutal, kind of like the last election we had in 2016. The Democratic Republican Party was basically split this time, so at least it's only a two-way race instead of a four-way race. Some supported Andrew Jackson, who was running again, and others supported incumbent John Quincy Adams. Both sides resorted to a new tactic called mudslinging, which is more about attacking the opponent's reputations and insulting them than it is like political substance. Like Instead of vote for me because I'll lower your taxes, it's vote for me because the other guy smells like farts, and that's mudslinging. There were buttons, like people wore buttons this election. There were slogans. There were rallies, political rallies. The election of 1828 very much started the trends that we see in elections today. So, thanks, election of 1828. Thanks for that. Great. So Jackson actually won this one pretty handily, basically running as the non-corrupt, everyday man's man and war hero. After winning, him and his followers formed a new political party, the Democratic Party. You may have heard of it. It's still around. Okay. The modern Republican Party hasn't been formed yet, though. We'll get there. So the Jackson presidency, Jackson was pretty popular with the regular people. He was a patriot. He's a war hero. Remember, he had been in Indian wars. He had basically conquered Florida from the Spanish. He had won the Battle of New Orleans. A lot of stuff he'd done that we've learned about so far. And he was a self-made man. I have a virtual lesson we'll talk about. He was just a poor boy from a poor family. People like that. So likability is good, especially since more people were allowed to vote by this time. Basically, you didn't have to be a landowner anymore to vote. That meant that factory workers, sharecroppers, and other odd-job white men could vote now instead of just landowning white men. But there's still no voting rights for anyone that is black or a woman. Not yet. So Jackson thought the common man on the street could do government work, and he didn't like the bureaucracy the government was becoming. A bureaucrat is an appointed government official with a specific task, like carrying out the laws. It's basically a government worker. And, like not all government workers are elected. Only the positions like senators and representatives and like sheriffs and city comptrollers. There's a lot of elected positions that do work, but there's a lot of unelected positions. And you get a problem when you have too many unelected positions, because then you have a government that's not really democratic anymore. It's half democratic, because the government is half run by people that are elected, and the other people, never get fired. People with government jobs seldom get fired, it seems. So the Jackson crew didn't like that. And you think, oh, well, they probably fired all the bureaucrats. They didn't fire, well, they did fire all the bureaucrats, but then he replaced them all with his own supporters. And the people that got fired were like, hey, that's not cool. I didn't do anything wrong. And he said, but Jackson pretty much said, too bad, I won, I'm the president, I can do what I want. Thus, he created the spoil system, which is generally the practice of winning something and then putting all the people that helped you in positions of power. Very interesting. It actually was so bad, and I can't believe your book doesn't talk about this. It talked about presidential cabinets. It is said that Andrew Jackson actually had 2 presidential cabinets. He had one cabinet filled with his friends and people that helped him win. Like he promised, like, oh, hey, if you help me win the state of Florida, I'll make you Secretary of the Interior. And so that's what he did, except the guy didn't know anything about that. So he had a cabinet of appointed friends, and then he had an actual cabinet of people that knew what the heck they were talking about. And they were called the kitchen cabinet because it is alleged that they met in the kitchen. This is kind of funny. That's what we have here. We have his kitchen cabinet. Pretty interesting. So Jackson did not make, or he did make the presidential nomination system better. He wanted to be more democratic. So instead of party leaders choosing candidates at like a caucus or a private meeting, they started having a nominating convention where they would have delegates from the states come in and say, hey, we like this guy to be president. So that was more democratic. Now, the last topic of the lesson is called the tariff debate. Honestly, I think the book is a little vague on it and confusing, so we'll keep it brief. Basically, the government passed its highest tariff yet in 1828. I think we've mentioned this. We've also mentioned the South hated tariffs because it helped the North, and it really just made the South's goods more expensive, where they imported a lot more. So 1828 was the highest tariff yet. The South was pretty mad about it. Jackson's own vice president, John C. Calhoun, from South Carolina, supported the state's right, specifically South Carolina's right, to nullify the tariff. Basically, South Carolina was like, we hate this tariff. we're declaring it unconstitutional. We're not following it. And his own vice president was into this. So you basically had Jackson and his vice president button heads over the right of South Carolina to nullify any laws, specifically the tariff. South Carolina was saying, we're going to nullify this tariff, and if you try to do anything about it, we'll secede from the Union. So Andrew Jackson was like, fine, I'm going to ask Congress to pass a bill called the Force Bill, which allows me to use military force to make you follow the law. And so you've got South Carolina threatening to secede, Andrew Jackson threatening to basically invade South Carolina and make them pay the tariff, and they're about to come to a head, and then finally South Carolina just accepted the tariff, and they didn't like it. But they did it because Andrew Jackson doesn't mess around. So that's your lesson for the day. Where are we at? 10, 11 minutes. All right, go ahead and knock out your quiz. It's 5 questions, 10 points. You get 2 attempts. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.